prayer, like listening for God's direction. And there's a whole bunch we didn't mention. Serving others. Do we find happiness in serving others?
Yes.
Being with friends and family, like you mentioned, sometimes even being with people that aren't our friends and family. That was a very interesting bit of the book. I can't remember if it was this one or this one. I just read both. But I believe it was the other book. A study was done on commuters, I believe in the New York subway. And half of the commuters they asked to ride the subway quietly. The other half of the commuters they asked to strike up a conversation with the person next to them. And they asked both sets of commuters how happy they expected they would be upon finishing the trip. Well, the people that were forced to strike up a conversation went, "We expect very low happiness." But when they asked people afterwards to rate their happiness on a scale of 1 to 10, the people that had struck up a conversation with a complete stranger were actually happier. I thought about that and realized that's true in my own life. My temptation is, okay, I need some time to myself here. And I realized that doesn't always make me as happy as I think it will, as I think it should. And that being with other people and serving other people really does make me happier than I think it will just about every time. It's a paradox. See if you notice that one in your own life. I'm just going to read off the list I have here of other habits of happiness that are covered in the book. Prayer, spiritual reading, the Mass, listening for God's direction, serving others, self-denial, confession, having a spiritual coach, compassion, thinking about what is good and holy, not dwelling on the negative, praising God in all circumstances, contentment, forgiveness, gratitude. Add those to all kinds of more everyday ones. Exercise, eating right, getting enough sleep. The list goes on and on. These are some of the habits of happiness that we'll be spending time with. You may be thinking, hey, most of these sound more like habits of holiness. Which brings us to our other major point. We find our happiness in God. Holiness leads to happiness. True or false?
True.
True. True. Think of all those Bible verses we read earlier about joy. Rejoice in the Lord. Shout for joy to the Lord. Nearly all of them specify that the source of our happiness is God. He's the one we take joy in. He's where our happiness comes from. It's where it goes. It's like a circle of happiness. We find our happiness in His presence, following His ways of love. What happens when we look for happiness elsewhere? Matthew Kelly covers that beautifully. I'm just going to read it aloud. Page 10, if you want to follow along. When we are children, we think to ourselves, oh, if only I could have that toy, I would be happy. But then we get that toy. And after a while, we realize that a toy is not going to satisfy our desire for happiness. So we turn our attention towards something else, perhaps a bike. We tell ourselves, if I ever get that bike, I will be happy. We get the bike. And of course, the yearning for happiness is still not satisfied. As we get a little older and social interactions become more important, we tend to attach our hope for happiness to friendship. Now we think to ourselves, if she became my best friend, I would be happy forever. But our desire for happiness cannot be fulfilled this way either. No one person can satisfy our immense desire for happiness. And it is not fair to attach that hope to any one person, not a friend or a parent or a spouse or anyone. There's my editorializing. So many relationships have died under the weight of this misplaced expectation. In our adolescent years, we tend to turn our attention towards pleasure. We tell ourselves, if I have this pleasure or that pleasure or all the pleasures at the same time, then I will be happy. But pleasure is a poor substitute for the happiness we desire. It is fleeting, and we yearn for something that is lasting. Our attention in early adulthood turns toward accomplishment, We think to ourselves, I know the answer now. If I can accomplish something great, I will stop feeling empty. I will stop being dissatisfied, and I will be happy forever. Well, maybe we do or maybe we don't accomplish something great, but regardless, the yearning for a happiness that is higher and deeper continues. At this point, most people just cycle back through all the same things, thinking that more of something or more of everything is the answer to their insatiable desire for happiness. So we chase more things, more sophisticated and refined things perhaps as we get older, but it really boils down to more toys, more money, more pleasure, more of the right friends, more accomplishment. But we end up dissatisfied and wondering, what on earth will satisfy this incredible desire for happiness? The answer is nothing. Why? Because we find our happiness in God. We've got a God-sized hole in our heart that nothing else can fill. God gives us all these gifts, all these pleasures, because he loves us. But we're not going to find our ultimate happiness there. We only find it in him. As Augustine said, God created us for himself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in him. We place God at the center of every decision we make. We choose to live our lives God's way, not our way. We put God at the center so that everything else falls into place, like you said at the beginning of class, so we can enjoy the good things God gives us without making them false gods. Let's play devil's advocate again. Why are we so often tempted to gorge ourselves on earthly pleasures? Why do we keep going back there, thinking over and over again that if only I have a cup of tea, I'll be happy. If only I watch my TV show, I'll be happy. Why do we do that to ourselves?
Trying to fill that empty hole.
Trying to fill that empty hole.
I've always thought because we are, how can I say this? We have 5 senses, and those 5 senses give us pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And we're constantly trying to fulfill those pleasures for our senses, thinking that's true happiness.
I like that. I'd like to add to it that in heaven we will still have our senses, but they won't gnaw at us in the same way they do now, you know?
I think that society kind of tells us, we see it in commercials and it's outside, forces that tell you, you need this kind of car or you need to make this kind of money and you're just bombarded by that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. I was driving to Phoenix yesterday, and on the way I passed billboards. The first billboard advertises new homes, $300,000 and up. And the next one is an advertisement for Vantage West. You deserve better. I'm like, if I read billboards all the way there, I would hate my life. So, I wrote down a couple of examples. Do we find happiness in longing for a new house, a better house? Do we find happiness in procrastination? There's one a bunch of you brought up. Do we find happiness in surfing the internet or watching TV when we know we should be working? How do we feel while we're procrastinating?
Guilty.
Guilty. Sometimes you can kind of get your mind off it and feel a little entertained, but no, it's usually more guilty, numb, distracted. And then you finish procrastinating, and then you feel awful. Happiness? No. I would call happiness found by doing the wrong thing false happiness. How do you know when something is giving you false happiness? When it's not based on love. When we're acting out of laziness, or envy, or pride, or lust, or sheer distraction. We're decreasing the amount of love between us and God, between us and everyone else. We are sucking the long-term happiness away. So, that's why we're going to work on getting rid of those negative habits, that resistance, because we find our happiness in God, because holiness makes us happy. All right, action item. Before we move on to resistance, we get to place God at the center of our decision making. So, close your eyes, think of a decision that you need to make in your life, something maybe that you're worried about, some project you're working on. I'd like you to quiet your heart, spend a minute in silent prayer, and ask God what He wants you to do about it.